I'm going to play this video clip by Todd Nepola. I kind of think it's wholehearted and truthful. I agree with his statements. I think it's true that he probably was a good stepfather and he didn't want anything to do with all this junk and it got out of hand and there's lies being told. But is it Bravo's problem, or is it like Alexia's kids didn't have to say what they said about him, and she didn't have to say? I mean, Adriana's another story. She's heard rumors, or maybe she's seen some articles. But the real issue is Alexia and her kids. If he's saying the truth, that they're out here lying on him. But how is that Bravo's fault? Because they're willingly saying what they're saying. But I do feel this is a heartfelt explanation on his end. But what do you guys think? I think I tend to believe him, but I don't know. It's also interesting that they don't bring up Frankie's dad, that he's such a good dad and he's there for him all the time. They don't show him or talk about him. So that was interesting that Todd dropped. I'm only adding a few minutes of it because it's a super long video, but it kind of, you get the gist of what he's trying to say. Also, if all this is true, I think it's sad that Alexia chose reality TV over her personal life with Todd, only because she seems to be really in love with him and he seems to be a good guy and a good stepfather. And maybe she shouldn't have to pick, but not everyone wants to have that toxic lifestyle either.
The biggest mistake I've made in my adult life was agreeing to participate in The Real Housewives of Miami. Now, I was not one who really wanted to give up my privacy and become a reality star. That was never for me, and I certainly never enjoyed filming, and I'm sure that's obvious to anyone who ever watched the show. But the final straw, the breaking point, came when lies started being told and Adriana went on TV and started making claims that I was struggling and couldn't pay my rent and I was having financial problems. And it was a real blow to me, and I couldn't believe people would make these kind of lies up. And I was very mad at her for lying on TV, and she knew it was a lie. And I was mad at Alexia for getting me involved in this mess. But I was the most mad at the producers who knew the story wasn't true. And they didn't just run it, they ran it and reran it and reran it with no regard for me or my feelings or the truth. And in fact, I was the one telling them after the story came out, and I knew that they filmed it, that I had just bought a $24 million shopping center. What was my financial problem? But they really didn't care. The show must go on. And they did. The show did go on. And it got to a breaking point where I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to make a very hard decision. I realized I couldn't live in this world anymore, and the woman I loved couldn't live without it. So I had to make a decision to leave. And it was a very tough decision, but it had to be made. I was well aware of the storyline they were creating for Series 7 about the reconciliation, and I agreed that I would go along with that. In return, I was under the impression I was getting some apologies from Adriana, and I was going to be let off the hook, so to speak, and not dragged like past husbands of these kinds of TV shows. So it seemed like a pretty fair deal to me, so I stayed quiet and let it air out. Now, not surprised at all that it didn't play out as I had expected. I see no apologies coming my way. Nobody acknowledging the slander and defamation of character they did to me. I see actually the story getting worse, and they're making up stories about how I moved out of the house and left Frankie alone, which none of this is true. It's just for the storyline, and I've stayed quiet. For 18 months, I sat back and stayed quiet out of respect and love to Alexia, but at some point, you're pushing too far, and this is the point. Now, I could understand Alexia bashing me. And I could understand her coworkers doing the same. Even the one I've never met once in my life who seems to be obsessed with me. That's all fine. And I'm not surprised one bit that the producers are running this, because they need a storyline to sell you guys a show. But what did surprise me is that they used Peter to come at me and bash me and say that I don't give a shit about Frankie. Well, now you hit a nerve, and now you have my attention, and you're going to start getting some responses. That's where you went too far. Now, there is no doubt Alexia is an amazing mother and does everything for Frankie she can. And so does his father, by the way, who never seems to get any credit. This guy works 5 days a week to support himself and spends almost every weekend out with Frankie, taking him out and taking care of him, being a great dad. And he deserves recognition. However, beyond those two people, there's nobody on planet Earth that's done 1,000th of what I've done for Frankie in the last 7 years. In 7 years' time of living with Frankie, just about every morning we'd wake up together before everybody else and have a coffee and talk. Every afternoon I come home from work and I spend time with Frankie. I didn't just provide for Frankie financially by putting a roof over his head and putting food on his table and designer clothes on his back. I did do that, but I also did a lot more. And to say I didn't give a shit is ridiculous. Let's talk about it. Took him to the movies, took him to the beach, took him to the jacuzzi, took him to the pool, took him on cruises, took him on vacation for weekend getaways. 2, 3, 4 nights a week, Alexia and I would take him to dinner.